Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is arise. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear arise used is to mean to emerge or become apparent. Now, as I thought about this verb and usage, I really thought about kind of negative things, so problems, issues, but I did find lots of examples and instances where someone had used it in a positive way. So to talk about opportunities that became visible or apparent as a result of something else. A second way you might hear arise used is to mean to originate. And I realize originate might be a new word, but really what it means is to have a certain beginning. So think of this as like kind of the starting point for something. A third way arise gets used is to mean to occur as a result of something else. And a fourth way you might hear arise used would be to get up or stand up. We'll talk about some more meanings with phrasal verbs in just a moment, and you'll see some connections to these kind of original definitions. But first, I want everyone to know that arise is an irregular verb. To make the progressive tense, you're just going to drop the E and then add ing to form arising. The past tense form of this verb requires a spelling change. So we're going to change the vowel I that's in the middle of the word to an O. This is going to make a long O sound. We would say arose, arose. And then the participle form of this requires us to change that vowel back to an I and add an N to the end to form arisen, arisen. Okay. Now, let's take a moment with those phrasal verbs. One you might encounter is to arise at. Many people use this to note that someone is waking up and or even getting up. So, an example of this. They arise at 5 a.m. every morning. Right? So here I'm describing someone's habit as to when they wake up. Another phrasal verb you might hear is arise from. This can have several different meanings. We're going to talk about 4 of them today. The first, again, is that get up or stand up. An example of this might be, she didn't arise from her bed until early afternoon. Okay, so here we've got someone who's maybe spending the whole morning resting. It sounds kind of nice, actually. A second way we can use the phrasal verb arise from is to talk about something moving in an upward fashion. An example of this might be, the singer arose from the ground with a cloud of smoke and was eventually perched 15 feet above the stage. I saw a sentence similar to this describing a pop singer and how her concert began, right? And so what they're noting here, the arose from the ground, moving in an upward fashion. A third way to use arise from would be to emerge from a very difficult situation. Here's an example of that. How did Andrew Carnegie arise from poverty to become one of the world's richest people to ever live? This was a sentence that I kind of shortened a bit for our example here, but it was meant to sort of catch our readers' interest. The piece started with this particular question, and then we're going to kind of walk us through this history. But many people would look at poverty as a difficult situation or the state of being poor. A fourth way to use arise from is to mean to result from something. An example here. The charges arose from an investigation by the district attorney. So what the sentence is telling us is sort of the first thing that happened was this investigation. Right? And the result is that charges arose. Last phrasal verb we'll discuss today is to arise out of. This means that something is being created or maybe caused by something else. An example of this. The research study arose out of previous work conducted by the team. So in this example, we might have a group of researchers kind of studying one problem, and maybe they realize, oh, wait, we could also study this second thing. So this second research study was created or caused by their earlier work. Now, let's spend a little time making some example sentences with our verb of the day, arise. Today, we're going to focus on the past perfect and the present perfect. I like to help my students sort of remember these multitude of structures by looking at the names of these verb tenses. So past perfect, present perfect, they both have two P's. So we're going to need two parts to make the affirmative in both of these verb tenses. But let's start with the past perfect. Many times we are using this particular verb tense to note that one action occurred before some point in time or before a second action. That second action many times will be in the simple past tense. Our structure for an affirmative past perfect sentence will be to start with our subject, then we're going to use the past form of have, which is had. So we have subject, had, and then our participle form of the verb. Here's an example. Confusion had arisen because of poor communication. So here, this might be kind of our as a result, right? Poor communication caused confusion. Now, if I want to make a negative past perfect sentence, my structure is to start with my subject, then had, not, and the participle. Here's another example. Those issues hadn't arisen before last week. And finally, we can ask yes or no questions in the past perfect. To do that, we start with had, then we have our subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Had the allegations arisen before he was hired? Right? So perhaps someone has been hired, and now we kind of learn, oh, maybe there are some bad things in this person's history. Now, let's move on to the present perfect. We use this verb tense to talk about actions that started in the past and continue into the present. We also use them to discuss things that happened at some unknown point in the past. Here, we need to pay attention to our subject. So in the affirmative, if our subject is I, you, we, or they, I'm going to use have and then the participle form of the verb. If my subject is he, she, or it, I will use has and then the participle form. You can see that in my example. Monkeypox has arisen as a health threat. This might be this emerge or even the originate, right? Many people weren't aware that this existed 6 months, 8 months ago. Now, let's take a look at a negative present perfect sentence. Here, our structure is subject, then have or has, whichever form matches our subject, then not, then the participle. Again, those issues haven't arisen. Now, you might be looking and thinking, wait a second, your negative examples are very close. Do they mean the same thing? Great question. So in my first, those issues hadn't arisen, right? So I'm sort of noting a point in time last week. If I go back, right, we didn't have a problem or an issue, right? Now, in the present perfect, at the point in which I'm speaking, or maybe I'm writing, maybe I'm emailing this, there have not been any issues. That's the difference. So there is sort of a subtle difference in those two sentences, and this is why we have these different verb tenses to sort of communicate when certain actions are or aren't happening, as the case might be. Finally, let's take a look at a yes or no question in the present perfect. To do this, we start with have or has, then we have our subject, then the participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Has an opportunity arisen to have a private conversation? Right? So has this, again, that first definition, has an opportunity emerged? Has it become apparent or obvious? Now, normally in my videos, I sort of move on to some related words, but I really don't think there are any we need to discuss today. So I'll end my video by just reinforcing that if you're watching this and wanting to practice, you're certainly welcome. Write your own sentences in the comments. I'll offer feedback. I used to make this offer much more frequently in my earlier videos. Nobody did it, so I stopped talking about it. But as the community has grown here, I thought I would sort of reintroduce this. When I teach in person in a classroom, instead of me making the example sentences in different verb tenses, I ask my students to. And it's a great way for them to practice and really master verb tenses and use these words in real ways that they might as they write or speak in other settings. So thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day.